Our next speaker is another new speaker to DevOps Days, Rocky. Is to DevOps Days in general, although she's spoken at several other events. But please put your hands together, give a warm welcome to Sara, who's going to be talking about how to DevOps when devs don't want to. So I'll leave it to Sara.
All right, thanks everybody. Good morning. Glad to be here at DevOps Days. My name is Sara Willett. I'm Director of BizOps at MasterCard. I live here in Colorado, so I'm local. I work from home. Most of the sort of management structure for the area I work in is in St. Louis. But my team in particular is all over the US, Ireland, and Brazil, so we've got a very distributed team. I started my career here in Denver at Raytheon. Then I went back to get my MBA at Michigan State. Landed an internship at IBM in Minnesota. Spent about 12 years there then, working full-time. Part in Minnesota, partly here in Colorado. And then I jumped to MasterCard about a year and a half ago. So throughout this career path, I've always been on the dev side of things, right? I've always worked on the dev side of the house. Now that I've been at MasterCard, I'm actually on the operations side. But all of my jobs through all of my career paths have all had this common thread. Either I was working on development tooling, so back at IBM in the old ClearQuest, ClearCase days, if there's any of you guys out there, onto RTC, moving into Git, then coming over here to MasterCard and working on a lot of our ops tools. Or the other role I've had has been an Agile coach, helping teams adopt Agile, set up Scrum teams, that kind of thing. Right, so when this DevOps thing came out, maybe 5-7 years ago when I got into it, right, this is my sweet spot. Right? This is where we take the Agile teams and we expand them to include more people in the conversation, add in the automation and the tooling. Right? This is what I know. So I've been working in DevOps probably for about 5 years now. And I love coming to DevOps Days and other conferences like this. Right? Last year was my first DevOps Days conference. I still go back and watch some of those videos. If you see the one on Is DevOps Success a Potemkin Village? That one last year was great. I love that one. So I always leave here inspired. Right? And I go back and you think, DevOps is awesome. DevOps is the right direction. DevOps can make us better. And they have this vision of living on this DevOps unicorn island where we're all in there together and we're a happy family and the builds are always green and you can get to production with the push of a button. Right? It's real, it exists. And then Wednesday, you go back to work, right? And you realize that your job is to manage the DevOps team, right? And you think, DevOps is not a team. DevOps is a mindset, right? And so, at least your company's on board. They realize you got this DevOps thing going on. But instead of putting the dev and the ops all together on Unicorn Island, they built the DevOps team, right? And so now instead of fewer silos, you've got one more. And you're the guy stuck in the middle, trying to get dev and ops to talk to each other, but they don't. They just talk to you. And then you have to fix both of their problems, right? Okay, so your job really isn't DevOps. Your job really is mostly CI/CD-ish stuff, right? And so how do you get the orgs to talk to each other? How do you get out of this mentality of the DevOps team? How do you get to that unicorn island? So that brings us to the topic today. How to DevOps when dev doesn't want to. And there could be a sister presentation to this, how to DevOps when ops doesn't want to, right? Since my background, I used to be mostly on the dev side, we're going to talk about that side a little bit. So how can you, as that siloed team in the middle, when you're not really part of dev or ops, make changes across the entire organization? Especially if your DevOps team exists in the first place, because maybe the org doesn't understand what DevOps really is, right? Maybe they couldn't agree. Dev and ops couldn't agree on how to work together, so they stuck you in the middle to mediate. So how do you, from that position, start to inch this organization closer to this sort of DevOps utopia? When DevOps is viewed as a thing you do instead of a mindset or a way you work, how do you start to change that culture? So tip number 1, build a coalition. Go out there and find people like you who understand DevOps, who know what it is, who love it, from QE, from dev, from release management, the product owners, the ops guys, maybe security, right? Everyone forgets security. Maybe pull the security guys into. Get them all together and start a grassroots effort. Find people who are passionate about DevOps and get them talking to each other. And you may find that some areas of your org don't even know what this DevOps thing is, don't really understand it, right? Maybe your product owners are out there, they don't really have a clue. It's okay, grab one of them anyway, get them in the conversation, and start talking about what does DevOps mean for us? It's more than just a team. How do we expand this mindset across the company? Get together on a regular basis, discuss how your orgs are operating. In one of those first meetings, probably, depending on how siloed your organization is, just talk about what do you do all day, right? And if you really want to get interesting, don't tell them, ask them. Go to the developers and say, what do you think DevOps does? What do you think my job is? What do you think I'm supposed to be doing for you? I guarantee you there will be misunderstandings all across the board, right? Use that, take advantage of those misunderstandings to really start talking to each other and to form those bonds. Find those areas where there's handoffs. Find those areas where there's friction. And then you can go to your management and you can say, look, if QE and dev together agree that this is a problem and they want us to work on a solution, that's going to be a lot more powerful than dev or QE or any one of you individually trying to make some changes. Find those partners, find those allies, push for the change together. Tip number 2, align your teams without necessarily calling it DevOps. Right? Depending on how you got to where your org is today, DevOps might be a dirty word in some areas of your company. And so they may not be ready to go in, and you say, we're going to go in, and we need to do a full reorg. We need to go full in, Spotify, squads, and tribes. We can't do DevOps unless we do that. Right? And they're going to look at you like you're nuts. Or you go in and say, we're renaming every person in this company to SRE. There's no more individuals, everyone's an SRE now. And again, they're going to look at you, right, like you're crazy. And we don't want to do that. We can't do that. We're too big to do that. We're too small to do that. We are too regulated to do that, right? If you're finance, healthcare, safety, we can't do that. Okay, so there's all these other models that organizations work by, right? Maybe you're a safe shop, right? Maybe you do scaled agile framework. And so you go in and you say, look, we did a fantastic job putting our safe Scrum teams together. We've got all these people together, except that guy. He's not on my Scrum team. And I have trouble getting work done from that guy or that team because they're not on my Scrum team. How do we get them a voice in my Scrum? Right? And you've just expanded that definition of who's working together. There's another one out there called Technology Business Management, TBM. It's a lot of times still very siloed in terms of the management structure of each of these different groups, but they put together something called a program council. So all of the products that you ship, all of the services you offer are put together in a program, right? And everybody from all of these different silos are together on a program council. So you may not be integrated at the lowest level where you'd really like to be, but at least at the senior management level, they're having conversations and aligning each other with their definitions of what things mean, what it means to put a product out, who needs to participate, what the priorities are. So whereas the DevOps Guild idea, tip number 1, was more of a grassroots, this is going to be sort of more of a top-down involved management kind of change. But I'm not suggesting that you go in and demand any one of these. The key here is understand what your org already does. The goal is to get the teams aligned, right? And every company has a different way of talking about this, right? SAFE uses different terminology than TBM, than Spotify. But really at the heart, all you need is that your teams are aligned, that they have a way to get your code from inception to production in a seamless manner, right? The organization structure underneath it is less important than having that team alignment. And so you can use any one of these models to help push for that alignment. Tip number 3, write it down. You will be amazed what development teams will accept if you just write it down and point them to the wiki page that says they have to do it. It's true, right? Especially, and here's the key, if there was no documentation previously, because how many of us are all bad at writing stuff down? If there was no documentation before, they can't prove it used to be different, okay? Write it down and tell them this is the new way we're working. This can be particularly powerful if what you're documenting are essentially acceptance criteria for how you as a DevOps team intake work. So I've got two examples of this. So one is, you're in that middle, you're probably getting flooded with tickets. If you're doing continuous integration, continuous delivery, you're actually deploying code somewhere multiple times a day, right? There's a lot of things in that pipeline that can break, right? And as soon as that pipeline breaks, you get a ticket, right? Or you get 10 tickets, and you go investigate, and you realize 8 times out of 10, it wasn't the pipeline that was broken. Someone checked bad code into that pipeline, right? And so you go down a rabbit hole trying to figure this out, what dev team checked in code. So create some acceptance criteria and document it in the form of like triage steps. Before you submit a ticket, hey, look, I have this great triage page for you. It's going to help you so much. This is a common problem. Go try A, B, and C. And then if you still have a problem, come contact me. Okay, so best case scenario, they go do A, B, and C, and they figure out it was their problem in the first place and you never get a ticket. Okay? Or worst case scenario, they do A, B, and C, you still get a ticket, but now you've got documented that they did their homework, and it really is a problem with your pipeline, and you can dig in and find the real problem. A second area where this can be really powerful is when you're deploying or you're rolling out a new CI/CD process or tool that you developed. So you develop this great new process, whatever it is, it's going to make your pipeline so much more efficient. And now you need to onboard all of the tools, all of the products onto your pipeline. Well, odds are not everything's going to onboard cleanly, right? You've got legacy code, you've got all different kinds of apps. So you have two choices. You can either onboard it yourself, probably write a bunch of custom code to get it to work, and then be stuck maintaining it forever. Okay, we don't like that option. What's the other option? Write down the criteria to use your pipeline and let dev choose when they're going to onboard, right? This service should be so awesome that everyone's going to want it because it's going to make their lives easier. But now you put the onus on them to figure out how to use it, right? So this has a couple advantages. You let dev choose when to make the jump, right? They may have critical cycles that you're not aware of. Now is not a good time. Maybe next week, next sprint is better. Let them choose. Lay out the benefits of the tooling. Everyone's excited about it, wants to use it. Define the entry points into your criteria, into this pipeline, right? What do you need to have in order to use my tool? Maybe you need to have a new monitoring hook built into the code. Okay, now it's on them to put that in and not you. And they really have to understand how your pipeline works in order to onboard their tool to it. So it increases that scope of understanding a little bit. So it's not just DevOps doing everything for dev team, but it's empowering the development teams to make the changes themselves. So we moved that line, just a little bit over. Taking it next step further, even better than writing it down is make it self-service. So it continues to blur that line between the dev and the ops with self-service tooling. So often DevOps teams, right, you're going to receive a story. The story is going to say something like, set up a new build for me, modify this database, write me a chef cookbook so I can deploy my thing. And you can do it. We've got the skills to do that. And instead what we want to do is think of ourselves as reviewers and not initiators of that kind of code. So use the documentation you wrote in the last tip and say, hey, look, you can write this chef cookbook yourself. Hey, look, you can onboard yourself to the Jenkins pipeline. Here's how to write your own Jenkins file. And so it's not just passing the buck to them, right? This takes some significant investment in both documentation and in tooling for teams to be able to onboard themselves. All right, so it's not just you copping out on work you don't want to do. It does take some time to create these onboard tools. But once you have them, it can be a win-win because you've given the development team more control over their own systems, and you've given yourself less work. The other big thing is you don't want to be on the critical path, right? When something's going to production and it's hot, you don't want to be stuck in the middle and be that wall that everyone has to go through to get to production. Teams need to be able to do that on your own. So I want to give you one little example from last year when I was here at DevOps Days. I was talking to the Dynatrace vendor, and we were talking about how we have the centralized monitoring tools team, and Dynatrace and Splunk and some other sort of general monitoring and dashboarding kind of things. And we said, well, this team is so hard to use because this team has a huge backlog. It takes like 3 to 4 months to get a new request onto Dynatrace or Splunk or whatever the tool was, right? And the Dynatrace guy, he looked at me and he said, what is the purpose of that team? Is their team there to control, or are they there to serve? Right? Is that centralized tools team to control or to serve? Right? And this light bulb went on, and they were there to control everything. They were there to make sure the data was consistent and it had a common look and feel across the whole company. Right? And there's value in that. But the downside was they had this giant backlog. Development teams had no understanding of how anything worked because they just handed it off. It took months to get anything onboarded. So instead, what if they had that as a self-service, right? Onboard to the monitoring tools as self-service. Would the quality of the data go down if they did that? Maybe. That could be a real concern. But any major issues, if you're set up as a reviewer, any major issues should be caught in that review. The wait time should shrink. The backlog for that common team should disappear, giving them time to focus on work that's really actually value add instead of just onboarding. Free up that centralized team, and the dev team has now gained more knowledge on how the whole system works and what it means to be a part of this tool chain. So letting go of that controlling mindset and shifting to a mindset of support and enablement for both your ops and your development teams helps to optimize that system as a whole. All right, and the last tip, influence outside your line. Right, okay, so you're that DevOps wall in the middle there, right? Expand your boundaries. What does that mean? Push out from just that little slice that you've been given. And it's a very common pattern that teams or organizations are designed like this, right? We've all heard jokes all this morning about being the DevOps team and the guys in the middle. It may have been formed due to a lack of understanding of, this DevOps is a mindset. It may have been that ops and dev couldn't agree on how to structure. Understand what that history is, and realize that if someone formed a DevOps team, somebody out there thinks DevOps is a good idea. Take that as your mandate to say, hey, look, you hired me to manage a DevOps team. What you really meant was hire me to manage a CI/CD team. That's not the title you gave me. You said I'm a DevOps manager. I'm going to manage DevOps, and this is how we're going to do it. Right? So don't be afraid to use that to expand your scope of influence within the company. Continually reiterate that DevOps is a mindset, that it needs to permeate, that it's not a task to be done by one team. Craft your work backlog and your processes around that mindset. Facilitate and support both dev and ops so that they can be better and faster at their jobs. Continuously push for processes that will promote the co-ownership. Some of these things may seem like really small pieces, right? And you, because you're the DevOps expert, these come naturally to you. Don't forget that these don't come naturally to the rest of the organization. That we've got plenty of time, plenty of resources to help expand this expertise from just out of your core little team. And if it's baby steps that get you there, that's okay. You're still moving forward, you still have a common direction, you can still make things happen. So I'd say, someday, I really would like to live on this DevOps unicorn island, right? The builds are always green, the CI/CD river is always flowing. Maybe there's a company out there that has this. I haven't found it yet. But most of us are still trying to figure this stuff out and get better at it every day. So I hope that you leave these couple days, DevOps days, with a few stars in your eyes, right, about what we can accomplish. But when you get back to work, assess your reality, right? Figure out what is really going on at your company. So assess how you work with your dev teams today. Build a team of DevOps advocates and create that alignment. Write down how you want it to change. Focus on supporting, not controlling those DevOps teams. through self-service tools and documentation. Take baby steps when you need to keep moving forward. And really, you can build your own unicorn, right? It's going to look different for all of us, but there are ways to get everyone on that island together. All right, so I know we have plenty of time left. That was intentional. I wanted to kind of open up a little conversation of what else you guys have. What other tips have you found? First, just a show of hands. Okay, how many people work in that DevOps team? The one stuck in the middle? Okay, yep, there's a good chunk of you guys out there. So I want to just, we've got the mic, hand it around. You know, what other tips have you guys found? What are good ways to engage the dev or the ops side? Like I said, there could be a sister presentation for what if ops doesn't want to. Maybe we'll do that one next year, we'll see.
Yeah, my number one tip is put devs on pager duty.
Yes, and I think, didn't the previous presenters mention that as well? Yeah, I was only half listening because I was getting ready for my own speech, but put devs on pager duty. Absolutely, they're the ones who know, this is what drives me nuts. They're the ones who know the application. And yet you're the one who's out there triaging it, because, well, you did the deployment. Well, I wrote the deployment tooling. I don't know how your app works. Absolutely, I love that one.
On what you're giving, because you say empower the developers through self-service. Mm-hmm. We've found a little bit of an issue with that, like we're giving too much to the developers.
Giving too much?
Yeah, so just there's a fine line on what you want to self-service and what you want to keep.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're just starting to do now is create this sort of extended DevOps team. So we've gotten agreement from a lot of the development Scrum managers to have a dedicated person within their team who will be sort of that liaison between the DevOps team and the dev. So you're not training all of dev, but you're training a pinpoint person. And so we're kind of coming up, it's all brand new or seeing how it works, but coming up with this idea of come join us. We'll teach you how to write Chef. We'll teach you how to, configure Jenkins, whatever it might be. And once you prove you know what you're doing, then we'll let you start doing your own deployments. Right? So kind of that, don't give them too much power, but at least have a model to pass that power on. Yep. Who else? Other tips or questions?
All right. Yeah, I would say my biggest tip there is figure out who's going to say no and who your roadblocks are going to be and get them involved early and incentivize them. Security is usually a big one, especially if it's like a Department of No style security. Mm-hmm. The DevOps toolchain has a lot of security concerns in it, right? There's a lot of version pinning, there's a lot of change that they're going to have to do, so be understanding of that, I think, mm-hmm. is because you're going to get a no down the road if you don't, right? Yeah,
absolutely. So that DevOps guild, when you're creating it, it's not just the stars in their eyes guys, right? You want some of those, the slide isn't up there anymore. Some of those oh shit guys, like, you want them on your guild because for that exact reason. They're the ones who are going to point out who's going to say no, what roadblocks are you going to hit, where are you going to have your biggest challenges.
One of the big challenges in pulling dev in is that a lot of times developers don't have a ton of say in how they spend their time. They've got limited cycles to work with, and so to pull in dev, you've got to go to business and make them realize, hey, it really is worth spending these cycles working on these other things.
Yeah, and we've seen, just personal anecdote, so MasterCard does both SAFe and TBM, two of the things I mentioned up there, right? SAFe is more at the development level, TBM is more at those business product owners. And we found that a lot of those guys don't have a lot of knowledge of DevOps and how these things work together. And so we've at least, this wasn't me doing, but they have what they call an operational health backlog. All right, so they said 20% of the backlog has to be dedicated to op health kind of stuff. And so far that's been the way we sneak things in. Now, if you don't even have that, right, then it can be definitely a big challenge to overcome. But at least having them recognize that operational health, maintenance, automation, is a dev initiative as well as a DevOps, and you need to spend time on it. Any other tips or questions? All right. Thanks, guys.